I always thought I was a good husband. At least, that's what I told myself in the quiet moments after a long day at work. My name is David, and I'm a software engineer, a job that keeps me glued to a desk more often than not. I met Linda during our senior year of college. She was vibrant, full of life, and I was drawn to her laughter like a moth to a flame. We married soon after graduation, and for nearly a decade we built a life together, a cozy home in a suburban neighborhood, 2 dogs, and countless memories. But then everything came crashing down. I was blindsided when I discovered Linda's affair with Tom, the local butcher. I remember that day vividly. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that felt like any other. I was running late, as usual, and I decided to stop by the butcher shop to pick up some steaks for dinner. It was a small shop, the kind that sells fresh, locally sourced meat. Tom was behind the counter, his hands working deftly with a knife, and I'd always admired his skill. But that day, something was different. I noticed a glint in his eye as he spoke to Linda, who stood beside him, laughing a little too easily at his jokes. I brushed it off at first. Maybe I was being paranoid. But when I got home and saw her phone buzzing with messages from a contact named Tommy, my heart sank. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I mean, what could possibly happen between my wife and a butcher? I had no proof, just a gnawing feeling in my gut. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day in my mind. Trust is such a fragile thing, and in that moment I felt it shatter. I thought about the vows we took, about the promises we made. I felt like a fool, like a man who had built a house of cards only to watch it collapse in an instant. Betrayal cut deeper than any knife Tom wielded. The next day I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted Linda. I didn't want to believe it, but I had to know. I asked her directly, and the look on her face told me everything. She didn't deny it. The words tumbled out as if she had been waiting for the moment to confess. "It's just physical," she said, as if that made it any better. My world crumbled around me. How could she? How could she choose him over me? In the days that followed, I felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion. I was a man betrayed, and I felt powerless. Tom, the butcher, had taken my wife from me. It wasn't just about losing Linda, it was about the humiliation. I had to do something. I couldn't just let it go. As I walked through the neighborhood, I passed by Tom's shop more times than I could count. Each time my blood boiled. I imagined him behind that counter, smirking, thinking he had won. I had to take action. Revenge was the only thing that made sense. I could destroy him in ways he never saw coming. I wasn't just going to sit back and let my life be turned upside down by a butcher. I spent hours thinking about my plan. It wasn't just about hurting Tom, it was about reclaiming my dignity. I had to show him that he couldn't just take what belonged to me without consequences. The more I thought about it, the clearer my path became. I had the knowledge and the means to ruin his business. Negative reviews, public complaints, these were my weapons. But even as I plotted my revenge, a small voice in my head warned me. Was this really who I wanted to be? I used to pride myself on being rational, on finding solutions through logic. But the betrayal had ignited something primal in me, something that craved justice. I had to remind myself that I was still David, the man who loved Linda, the man who believed in right and wrong. I took a deep breath and prepared myself for the next steps. I would gather information about Tom's business, figure out how to hit him where it hurt. I had to be strategic, careful not to get caught. This was my fight, and I was determined to win. The days turned into a blur as I began to piece together my plan. I was consumed by thoughts of revenge, and the once vibrant world around me faded into a dull backdrop. My work at the software company became a mere distraction, a necessary evil to keep my mind off the mess of my personal life. I was a ghost in my own home, moving through the motions but feeling utterly detached. Linda tried to reach out to talk, but I could barely look her in the eye. How could I face the woman who had shattered my trust? I started my research into Tom's butcher shop, which was just a few blocks from our house. It was a quaint little place, popular among locals for its quality meats. The sign over the door read Tom's Butchery, and inside it always smelled of fresh cuts and spices. I had been a loyal customer, but now it was tainted with memories of Linda's laughter echoing off the walls. I had to know everything about Tom, his business practices, his reputation, any weaknesses I could exploit. The first step was easy. I began to frequent the shop more often, but not for the meat. I was there to observe. I watched how Tom interacted with customers, how he handled his products, and how he managed his staff. I took mental notes of everything: the way he spoke, the way he smiled too easily, the way he looked at women. My heart raced with every visit, the anger boiling just beneath the surface. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between Tom and one of his employees. They were discussing a recent shipment of meat that had been delayed. "I can't afford another complaint," Tom said, his voice tinged with frustration. "If I lose the trust of my customers, this place will go under." The words struck me like lightning. This was my opening. I could exploit his fear of losing business. It fueled my desire for revenge. I left the shop that day with a plan forming in my mind. I would create fake accounts online to leave scathing reviews. I would pose as dissatisfied customers and file complaints with health departments. I would make sure Tom felt the weight of my fury. I needed him to know that his actions had consequences, and I was more than willing to take him down. But as I sat in front of my computer that night preparing to draft my first review, a wave of guilt washed over me. I had always prided myself on being a good person, someone who stood up for what was right. Was I really going to destroy this man's livelihood? I thought about the butcher shop's employees, the ones who depended on their jobs to feed their families. Did they deserve to suffer because of Tom's betrayal? I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. But then I thought of Linda. I thought of the way she had betrayed me, the way she had chosen him over me. I felt the anger rise again, and it pushed the guilt aside. This was not just about Tom. It was about regaining my self-respect. I took a deep breath and began typing, my heart racing as I poured my emotions into the words. Disgusting service and questionable meat quality. I found hair in my steak and the customer service was appalling. I will never return, and I advise others to stay away. As I hit post, a strange sense of satisfaction washed over me. It was the first step, a small victory in a battle that felt monumental. I spent the next few days crafting more reviews, each one more scathing than the last. I became a ghost on various review platforms, leaving a trail of negativity that I hoped would tarnish Tom's reputation. The more I delved into this world of online sabotage, the more I felt empowered. I began to file complaints with the local health department, creating a facade of concern for public health. I fabricated stories about ill-prepared meat and unsanitary conditions. Each complaint I filed felt like a blow to Tom. I imagined him sweating under the pressure, wondering what was happening to his beloved shop. But amidst the satisfaction, I couldn't shake the lingering doubts. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. I had crossed a line, and with each passing day, the weight of my actions grew heavier. I began to wonder if I was truly seeking justice or simply drowning in my own bitterness. One evening, I found myself sitting in our living room, staring at Linda as she flipped through channels on the television. She was oblivious to my turmoil, lost in her own world. I wanted to scream at her, to let her know how much pain she had caused me. Instead, I sat in silence, a storm brewing inside me. I was at war with myself, caught between the desire for revenge and the nagging voice of morality that whispered I was better than this. But I had come too far to turn back now. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I would not allow Tom to escape unscathed. I had a mission, and I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. As the days turned into weeks, my plan to sabotage Tom's butcher shop began to unfold. Each negative review I posted was met with a sense of exhilaration that I hadn't expected. I felt like a puppeteer pulling the strings of an unsuspecting marionette. I would check the review sites obsessively, watching as Tom's ratings plummeted. It was as if I was watching my revenge play out in real time, and it was intoxicating. But the more I engaged in this deception, the more I wrestled with the moral implications of my actions. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moments when Linda had confessed her affair. The pain was still fresh, a wound that refused to heal. I justified my actions by reminding myself that Tom had wronged me first, that he had taken something precious from me. But as I plotted my next moves, the guilt began to eat away at my resolve. One day, while I was at the local coffee shop, I overheard a couple at the next table discussing Tom's shop. "Did you hear about those bad reviews?" one of them said. "I used to love going there, but now I'm not sure I want to risk it." My heart raced. My plan was working. I felt a rush of power hearing their doubts about Tom's business. But then I also felt a pang of guilt. These people had no idea that my anger was driving their decisions. I couldn't help but think about the employees who worked at Tom's shop. They were just trying to make a living, and I was putting their livelihoods in jeopardy. Each time I saw a new review pop up, I imagined the conversations happening behind the counter, the uncertainty that must be creeping in among the staff. I had to remind myself that this was Tom's doing, not theirs. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was becoming a monster in my quest for revenge. Despite the turmoil within me, I pressed on. I devised a plan to take things a step further. I started reaching out to local food bloggers and influencers, using fake identities to pitch stories about Tom's shop. "Have you heard about the butcher with questionable practices?" I would ask, planting seeds of doubt in their minds. I knew that if I could get a popular blogger to write a negative piece about him, it would send Tom's business into a tailspin. I spent hours researching food bloggers in our area, crafting emails that dripped with feigned concern. I detailed my fabricated experiences, embellishing the stories to make them sound credible. I felt like a puppeteer, orchestrating a grand performance, and it thrilled me. But beneath that thrill lay a gnawing anxiety. What if I was caught? What if someone traced the reviews back to me? The fear didn't stop me. It only fueled my determination. I was willing to risk everything to ensure that Tom felt my wrath. I began to notice subtle changes in my behavior. I became more secretive, more withdrawn. I stopped meeting friends for drinks and stopped calling my family. My world had shrunk to the confines of my home and Tom's butcher shop. Revenge was all-consuming, and I was addicted to it. One evening, I decided to take a trip to Tom's shop under the guise of being a regular customer. I wanted to see how he was handling the fallout from my actions. As I walked in, I noticed the tension in the air. The employees were quieter than usual, their laughter replaced by nervous whispers. Tom stood behind the counter, his face tight with frustration as he served customers with forced smiles. I picked up a package of ground beef, pretending to inspect it while I observed him closely. This was the man who had stolen my wife, yet here he was, struggling to keep his business afloat while I orchestrated his downfall from the shadows. I felt a mix of satisfaction and unease. I was winning, but at what cost? As I stood there, I overheard Tom speaking to one of his employees, a young woman named Sarah. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up," he said, his voice tinged with desperation. "If we keep getting complaints like this, I'll have to let people go." A wave of guilt washed over me. I had never wanted to hurt innocent people. I only wanted to make Tom suffer. But the reality was that my actions were causing collateral damage. I thought about Linda, about how she had betrayed me, and I felt a surge of anger. This was her fault too. If she hadn't chosen Tom, none of this would be happening. I left the shop that day feeling conflicted. I had succeeded in creating a rift in Tom's business, but I was also creating a chasm in my own soul. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. I received notifications that my reviews were being shared widely, and Tom's business was suffering. I felt powerful yet hollow. I had set out for revenge, but in doing so, I had lost sight of myself. I was becoming the very thing I despised. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on a dangerous path. Revenge was consuming me, and I was losing touch with who I was. I had to remind myself that I was also a victim in this situation. I had been wronged, and I deserved to feel justified in my actions. But with every passing moment, I felt the moral weight of my choices pressing down on me. As I sat at my desk staring at the screen, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could continue down this dark path of vengeance, or I could step back and reclaim my life. I had to make a choice, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. As I sat at my desk, the tension in my chest was palpable. I was a man on the edge, caught between the thrill of revenge and the gnawing guilt that had begun to consume me. I felt like I was living in a whirlwind, spinning faster and faster, and I was terrified of where I would land. The bitter taste of betrayal lingered on my tongue, but so did the realization that I was losing myself in the process. I decided I needed a distraction, something to pull me out of the dark spiral I had created. I reached out to an old friend, Mark, who I hadn't spoken to in a while. He was a good guy, someone who had always been there for me during tough times. We agreed to meet for drinks at a bar downtown. And as I made my way there, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe talking to him would help clear my mind. When I arrived, Mark was already seated at a corner table nursing a beer. He looked up and smiled, and for a moment I felt a rush of nostalgia. We used to have so much fun together, sharing laughs and stories. But as I sat across from him, I found myself struggling to engage. My mind kept drifting back to the butcher's shop, to Tom and Linda, and the chaos I had unleashed. "Hey man, you seem a little off," Mark said, concern etched on his face. "Everything okay?" I hesitated before answering, unsure of how much to share. "It's just life, you know. Things have been tough lately." "Do you want to talk about it?" he offered, leaning in slightly. I considered it for a moment. Part of me wanted to unload my burdens, to share the weight of my betrayal and my revenge. But I also didn't want to burden him with my problems, especially when they felt so twisted and dark. Instead, I shrugged and changed the subject, asking about his job and family. As we talked, I could feel the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. For a brief moment, I was able to forget about Tom and Linda, but as the evening wore on and the drinks flowed, my thoughts began to spiral back. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was becoming a stranger to myself. I was wrapped in a cloak of bitterness, and it was suffocating. That night, I returned home, feeling more conflicted than ever. I stood in the living room, staring at the photos that adorned our walls. Pictures of happier times with Linda, vacation snapshots, and smiles that felt so distant now. I realized that I was not just fighting against Tom, I was battling against the very essence of who I once was. In the days that followed, I decided to take a step back from my revenge. I needed clarity, a moment to reassess my actions. I avoided Tom's shop, refusing to let my anger drive me further down that destructive path. Instead, I focused on myself, trying to reconnect with the David I used to know, the one who believed in love and trust. But every time I saw Linda, the memories of her affair crept back in, tainting my resolve. She was trying to mend things, to show remorse, but I struggled to accept it. I felt like I was in a fog, unable to see the way forward. I wanted to forgive her, to move past this betrayal, but the wound was still too raw. Then one evening, as I was scrolling through social media, I stumbled across a post that made my blood run cold. A local food blogger had written a scathing review of Tom's butcher shop. It was filled with exaggerated claims and sensationalized stories, painting Tom as a monster. I recognized my handiwork in the shadows, the seeds of doubt I had planted taking root. The blogger had linked back to my fake review, and suddenly I felt a rush of guilt wash over me. I realized that my actions were no longer just aimed at Tom. They were affecting innocent people who had no idea of the chaos I had set in motion. I felt sick to my stomach. This was no longer about revenge, it was about destruction. I knew I had to do something to remedy the situation. I couldn't let my craving for vengeance spiral out of control and ruin lives. It was time to take responsibility for my actions. The thought of facing Tom made my heart race, but I had to confront him, not just for him, but for my own soul. The next day, I found myself standing outside Tom's butcher shop. The sign hung above the door, taunting me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. I was ready to face my rival, to confront him about the affair, and to take accountability for my actions. As I stepped inside, the familiar smell of meat and spices hit me. Tom stood behind the counter, looking weary but determined. The tension in the air was palpable, and I felt a mix of anger and regret wash over me. I approached him, my heart pounding. "Tom," I said, my voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "We need to talk." He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "David, what's this about?" I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I know about the affair, I know about you and Linda, and I've done some things I'm not proud of." Tom's expression hardened, and for a moment I saw the anger flash in his eyes. "What have you done?" I explained everything, the reviews, the complaints, the way I had tried to ruin his business out of spite. I watched as his expression shifted from disbelief to anger. "You think you can just come in here and destroy me because of what happened between us?" "I don't want to destroy you," I said, my voice rising. "I wanted you to feel what I felt, but I see now that I was wrong. I shouldn't have dragged innocent people into this." Tom's eyes narrowed. "You think I wanted this? I didn't choose to hurt you. I didn't choose any of this." The weight of his words hit me. I had let my anger blind me to the fact that we were both victims in this situation. I had been so consumed by revenge that I had failed to see the humanity in Tom. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm sorry for what I've done. I want to make it right." Tom studied me for a moment, his expression shifting. "Making it right won't be easy, David. You've done a lot of damage." "I know," I replied, "but I want to help. I want to take down the reviews, to retract the complaints. I want to fix this." As we stood there, an unexpected understanding began to form between us. We were both flawed men, caught in a web of betrayal and anger. And while I couldn't change what had happened, I could take steps to repair the damage I had caused. That day marked a turning point. I had taken the first step toward redemption, not just for Tom, but for myself. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I was willing to face the consequences of my actions. After my confrontation with Tom, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. I had taken a significant step towards confronting my demons, but I knew that the path to redemption wouldn't be easy. I left the butcher shop with a newfound determination, but also with the weight of my actions pressing heavily on my shoulders. I spent the next few days drafting a plan to rectify the damage I had done. My first step was to remove the negative reviews I had posted online. I created a list of all the platforms where I had left my scathing comments, and I began the painstaking process of logging into each account. The guilt washed over me in waves as I read my own words, words that had been fueled by anger and betrayal, but now felt like a betrayal of their own. As I deleted each review, I felt a sense of cleansing. I was erasing the poison I had spread, but I also knew that this wouldn't be enough. I needed to publicly address my actions, to take responsibility and apologize for the harm I had caused. It was time to put my pride aside and face the consequences of my revenge. I decided to reach out to the food blogger who had written the sensationalized piece about Tom's shop. I drafted a message explaining who I was and what I had done. I admitted that my actions had been misguided and that I had manipulated the truth to serve my own agenda. I asked if she could consider writing a follow-up piece to clarify the situation, to set the record straight. As I hit send, I felt a rush of vulnerability. I was exposing myself, admitting my faults to someone I didn't know. But I also felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the first step in repairing the damage I had caused, not just to Tom, but to myself. In the following days, I continued to reach out to local media and community members, sharing my story. I wanted to make it clear that I had acted out of anger and regret, and that the reviews and complaints were unfounded. It was a humbling experience, one that forced me to confront the reality of my actions. I also made the decision to speak with Linda. I needed to understand her perspective, to see if there was a way to rebuild what had been lost. We met at a cafe, and as I sat across from her, I felt the weight of our shared history. The laughter, the love, and now the betrayal hung heavy in the air. "David," she said softly, her eyes filled with concern, "I'm so sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness." I nodded, feeling the familiar pain rise in my chest. "I know it was a mistake, Linda, but it's not just about what you did, it's about how I responded. I let my anger take over and I hurt people in the process." "I've seen the reviews," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Tom has been struggling because of it. He didn't deserve that, and neither did the people who work for him." I'm trying to make it right, I said, my voice steady. I've reached out to retract the reviews and make amends. I want to fix this. Linda looked at me, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. I want to support you in that. I want to help you through this. As we talked, I realized that there was still love between us, buried beneath the pain. It would take time, but I believed we could find a way back to each other. We were both flawed, both capable of making mistakes, but perhaps we could learn and grow from this experience together. Over the next few weeks, I continued my mission to rectify the damage I had caused. I reached out to Tom again, this time with a genuine offer to help him rebuild his reputation. I suggested we collaborate on a community event to showcase his shop, inviting locals to come and experience the quality of his products firsthand. Tom was hesitant at first, but as we spoke, I could see the flicker of hope in his eyes. He agreed to the idea, and together we began planning an event that would bring the community together. It was a chance for him to showcase his skills and for me to take responsibility for my actions. As the day of the event approached, I felt a sense of nervous excitement. I had spent so long plotting revenge, and now I was working alongside the very man I had sought to destroy. It was surreal, but it also felt like a step toward healing. On the day of the event, the butcher shop was bustling with activity. Families gathered to sample Tom's meats, and the atmosphere was filled with laughter and conversation. I watched as Tom interacted with customers, his passion for his work shining through. It was a side of him I hadn't seen before, and it made me realize that he was more than just the man who had betrayed me. He was a talented butcher who loved his craft. As the afternoon wore on, I felt a sense of camaraderie growing between us. We shared stories, laughed over the absurdity of our past, and slowly began to build a bridge over the chasm of betrayal. I could see the community rallying around Tom, and it filled me with hope. By the end of the day, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders. I had taken the necessary steps to make amends, and in doing so, I had also begun to heal myself. I had learned the hard way that revenge only breeds more pain, and that true strength lies in forgiveness and understanding. As I left the shop that evening, I glanced back at Tom, who was chatting with a group of satisfied customers. I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had faced my demons, taken responsibility, and found a way to move forward. But the journey wasn't over. I still had to confront my own feelings about Linda and the future of our relationship. We had a long road ahead, but for the first time in a while, I felt hopeful. The aftermath of the community event was more positive than I could have imagined. Tom's butcher shop received an influx of customers eager to support a local business that had been unjustly tarnished. I watched as he regained his footing, the worry lines on his forehead slowly fading away. It was a strange feeling, seeing him thrive after everything that had transpired between us, but it also brought me a sense of closure. As for me, I returned home that night with a mix of emotions. I had faced my mistakes and taken steps to rectify them, but the journey of healing was just beginning. I knew that rebuilding my relationship with Linda would take time and effort, but I was willing to invest in it. A few days after the event, Linda and I sat down for dinner together, something we hadn't done in a long time. I felt a sense of nervous anticipation as we shared a simple meal. The atmosphere was charged with unspoken words and lingering emotions. "David," she said, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot about everything about us." I looked up, my heart racing. "Me too. I want to hear what you have to say." "I know I hurt you deeply and I can't take that back," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "But I've realized how much I value what we had. I want to work on rebuilding our relationship if you'll let me." I nodded, feeling a swell of hope. "I want that too, Linda, but we have to be honest with each other. We need to talk about what happened and how we can move forward." We talked for hours, peeling back the layers of hurt and betrayal. Linda expressed her remorse and took accountability for her actions. I shared my own struggles, the pain of betrayal, the darkness I had wandered into while seeking revenge, and the guilt of dragging innocent people into our mess. It felt liberating to lay everything bare, and I could see the flicker of understanding in her eyes. As we spoke, I realized that we were both growing in our understanding of ourselves and each other. We were flawed individuals who had made mistakes, but we were also capable of change and growth. It was a long road ahead, but we were willing to walk it together. In the weeks that followed, Linda and I began to rebuild our relationship. We took small steps, going on dates, having deep conversations, and working through the pain together. It wasn't easy, but we both recognized that the love we shared was worth fighting for. At the same time, I continued to support Tom's butcher shop. I became a regular customer, not just to make amends, but because I genuinely appreciated the quality of his products. Each time I walked in, we would exchange friendly banter, and I could see the weight of the past slowly lifting from both of us. One day, as I was picking up some steaks for dinner, Tom approached me with a serious look on his face. "David, I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't have to help me, but you did. It means a lot." I smiled, feeling a sense of camaraderie. "We both made mistakes, Tom. I'm just glad we could find a way to move past it." He nodded, and for the first time, I felt like we were on equal ground. We had both faced our demons and emerged stronger. As the months passed, I realized that the experience had changed me. I had learned valuable lessons about trust, forgiveness, and the consequences of letting anger guide my actions. I was no longer the man consumed by revenge. I was a man who had faced his flaws and sought redemption. Looking back, I could see how the entire ordeal had transformed my life. I had come to understand that while betrayal could cut deep, it was possible to rise from the ashes, to rebuild and heal. I had learned that true strength lies not in vengeance, but in the ability to forgive, to grow, and to move forward. One evening, as Linda and I sat on our porch watching the sunset, I took her hand in mine. "You know, I think we can get through anything together," I said softly. She smiled, her eyes shining with love. "I believe that too, David. We've both been through so much, but I think it's made us stronger." As we sat together, I felt a sense of peace settle in my heart. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought us to a place of understanding and love. We were still navigating the complexities of our relationship, but we were doing it together, hand in hand. In the end, I realized that life is messy, filled with unexpected twists and turns, but it's how we choose to respond to those challenges that defines us. I had chosen to confront my pain, to seek redemption, and to embrace the possibility of healing. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over our home, I knew that I was no longer just a man scorned. I was a man reborn, ready to face whatever life threw my way, with love and resilience in my heart. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer held me captive. I had found my way back to myself, and in doing so, I had rediscovered the beauty of love and forgiveness. And that was the greatest victory of all.